All right, we continue our focus on water scarcity now. Pollution and climate change are some of the biggest contributors to the crisis. At times, the water quality is so poor due to pollution to a point that it's not usable. Let's discuss this further now with Greenpeace climate and energy campaigner Nhlanhla Sibisi. Nhlanhla, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Perhaps to start with the example that comes to mind quickly, Gqeberha. They're edging closer to taps running dry. Some argue that the water scarcity is not necessarily attributed to just climate conditions alone. There's rapid urbanization that is a problem, and even mismanagement and pollution. Where do you stand on this debate?
Good morning and thank you for the invite. With the example that you've given of Gqeberha, we could say that it is a question of that water has reached a level where it is not easily usable now. And that's as a result of the silt that actually exists below at the level of the plant. And as Greenpeace Africa, we've actually been highlighting this issue of water scarcity, if you'd recall that from the time of the Cape Town Day Zero that we had experienced around 2018. We actually did a campaign where we were highlighting what are the measures that actually need to be put in place to avoid other regions as well falling into the same situation. And what we are seeing is that it is a result, as a result of the changing patterns of the weather, which is attributed to climate change. We see some areas are drying up much quicker, as much as we are seeing floods in other areas. So in the case of Gqeberha, it's a question of, it's not the first time this has been highlighted, but it has been for a couple of years now been mentioned that there are regions in the Eastern Cape that are actually going to go through the same situation as Cape Town went through, and other areas that have already gone through that situation. It's just that they've not been highlighted as much as we've seen with Cape Town.
But it boggles the mind that why would they still go through the same situation? I'm glad you touch on Cape Town, because we've been arguing here, even speaking to one of my reporters, that, you know, we have a situation where the city of Cape Town went through this. They now have the blueprint or the manual to avert such a crisis. So why would Gqeberha still be going through this when we've got a Cape Town that went through it so that other regions wouldn't go through it?
One of the things that we would actually attribute it to is the lack of foresight as well as the lack of proper management. Because what we have been seeing from the local level is that there are warnings that have been given through different types of research that have been done even by your academic institutions in the region, highlighting this pending crisis or the water scarcity. The problem is that we don't have foresight at the local level or the local authority to actually plan for such situations. Now that we have learned from the Cape Town situation, you would have hoped that actually we would be taking more measures to actually overcome this, but also not at the local level. The support also needs to come from the national level, where a country assessment, which by the way, has been done through different research studies. A country assessment is done to actually plan for areas that are already going through the water crisis that we are seeing now happening in Gqeberha. But one thing that we would like to actually urge the national government is that there should be a little bit more foresight, a little bit more planning in terms of how do we avert the situation. Because the unfortunate part is that it does impact the livelihood of people. It does impact the way that business operates. It does impact the way that, the ordinary folk has to go about their business. And if we are lacking in doing such planning, then we're actually letting the nation down.
I suppose it does talk to a lack of foresight, because, I just read 2 days ago that they're looking now to build infrastructure to reroute water from a dam that actually still has enough water. So clearly it is a foresight issue. But also another talking point is the mismanagement, because there have also been reports that in Nelson Mandela Bay particularly, they lose 1/3 of their water to leaks. Surely it can't make sense for a drought-stricken area to have mini lakes in the middle of streets because of burst pipes.
Yeah, and this is a countrywide problem, as you've noticed also with the floods that have been happening in KZN. One of the things that have become apparent is that the infrastructure has aged to a point that it can't take any more stress. And we're seeing that in all provinces across the country. So it means that one thing that we are also failing to do, or another thing that we are failing to do, is to make sure that we do proper maintenance as well as upgrades as they are needed. And we know that we've actually inherited infrastructure that's quite old, and this infrastructure requires us to now put aside the required resources and make it a point that this infrastructure is renewed. And if this is not done, and as we have seen, each and every time, whether we're having a situation where there are floods, it means that the infrastructure will easily be damaged, or even if there are no floods in areas like Gqeberha right now, the infrastructure is also taking a little bit of a knock or some pressure, and it can't keep up. And just to mention one of the points that you alluded to of how now Gqeberha is trying to divert water from another pipeline, it comes back to from another dam. It comes back to the same issue of what kind of planning are we involved or getting involved in at the local as well as the national level to make sure that we have this foresight that I've mentioned, where we are prepared rather than being reactive to all the situations that we're finding ourselves when it comes to water pollution. When it comes to the water clerk.
You touched on the human element of the story, that this actually affects ordinary citizens. And in fact, it's gone on to highlight the inequality issue as well, because here you're seeing those in Gqeberha that have the resources to get boreholes, they're pretty comfortable. But then you have those in the townships that are now dealing with the issue where they'll have to deal with the intermittent water supply.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And one of the biggest concerns that we have as Greenpeace, as I mentioned earlier on, is the livelihood of people. Because this, at the end of the day, the mismanagement, the lack of planning, the lack of foresight when it comes to managing our water resources will, at the end of the day, impact the ordinary folk who, as you rightfully said, some people can afford a borehole, and even that borehole water is not as the same quality as the water that you would actually get from your municipality. But now it disrupts people's lives. It creates a ripple effect where you find that for some reason people have to be late for work. For some reason people sometimes don't go to work because of this water situation. So you can imagine the ripple effect that it's having on the economy. And we know that we are at a situation where we cannot afford to be getting people, to lose jobs. So I think that also as communities, we need to actually hold local local authorities accountable and responsible for the way that our water resources are being managed. So in other words, we also as the ordinary folk have a responsibility to make sure that these resources are managed properly.
And thank goodness for organizations such as yours, because you also agitate for change and hold these authorities accountable. Thank you very much, Nhlanhla, for your time. That was Greenpeace's Nhlanhla Sibisi.